don't use the internet, only the devil will use the internet.
Good evening. Tonight I have the pleasure of speaking with Mr. Tom Kawczynski. Tom is a former civil servant, a homesteader, and author of a number of books, over 10 it seems, including his 2021 work, Come Out of Babylon, How America Fell So Far from Grace, as well as the host of a number of podcasts, past and present, Coronavirus Central, which has been deplatformed, and his current podcast, Sunrise in Pineland, which he streams nearly daily on his YouTube channel. Sir, thank you so much for coming on, and it's a true pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it very much. And if you're interested, Exit Strategy Channel is the formal name of the channel on YouTube, because they made me name it years ago, and through all the iterations, it hasn't kept up. But if you want to find my work, it is on Amazon. I've written, I think, 13 books, two fiction, 11 fiction, ranging from topics to politics, economics, spirituality, history. I'm an unrepentant, or I should say I'm repentant to the Lord, but I'm an unapologetic Christian who looks at things from a dissident perspective. And I have the pleasure of having a wonderful audience, for which I'm grateful you are also a member. And we have an opportunity to discuss things that a lot of people don't talk about. So I'm looking forward to a fun interview today and seeing what questions you have to get me with.
Excellent, sir. Excellent. It's really all on this side. I discovered you through our mutual friend, Lamprey Milt. We were talking about the current pandemic. Over a year ago, I think, was the first time I had discovered your work. And the conversation that you had with Lamprey was just very candid. It was very honest. And you guys were saying things that I was thinking, from looking around at the time in the middle of the lockdown, basically. I think it was last summer. And that got me following your work. And then you began doing the morning shows. And I've been trying to show up to the live broadcast whenever I'm up that early, since you are an early bird.
It's very difficult because my shows are totally organic. It's like Dostoevsky's stream of consciousness meets geopolitics on steroid with a spritzing of the Inquisition. So it's not for everyone, but if you can keep up with it, or if you're willing to put it down to 0.75 speed, it's definitely a unique experience. It's unlike anything else. And the only thing I wish, actually, is we could do more interviews like this. The problem is I am a total Luddite when it comes to technology, which is ridiculous, but it is the actual truth. And part of that, like you said, homesteader, I've been going low tech and going away from the system a little bit. Yeah. But it's been a pleasure. And one of the joys of the community we've built is people like yourself and people like Lamprey and all of us who are coming together to deal with the problem of a civilization that's killing itself, and what we're going to talk about within that, all the various options, because there's a lot of ways. And one of the things that I think is really important, is it's in my work that's unique, is people like to take a niche. I talk about politics. I talk about economics. I talk about finance. I talk about this. And the thing is, it's the interrelations between them where the really interesting things happen. The things we're allowed to combine and not allowed to combine. And if you want to start finding new solutions to problems that are vexing to us, you got to start thinking about how things are connected in ways people won't, and solutions that people haven't been willing to consider. And it's a hard space to occupy, because now we live in a time when dissidents are castigated. We're literally presented as terrorists, like we see in Canada right now, for asserting the freedom to have thought and original, content. So I'm excited to be on here. I'm excited that you're doing the work, and it is an honor and a privilege to spend a little time with you and your audience to put out maybe some thoughts, some message. And if you like what you hear, you're welcome to come listen to me. Very accessible. And finding me on Telegram, t.me/Atlantic Homeland. It's like the most Isley cantina of the dissident world. You will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy, except that we're the good guys. We just don't look like it because we don't like razors.
Yeah, no, I haven't bought a razor in years. I love it. Well, awesome. That was quite the interview, the introduction, and I'll be sure to put all of the links to your books and Telegram channel and YouTube channel on the stuff when I get it uploaded. Absolutely, I would love to get more people who think the way we do, who can see these issues interacting, because that's my whole point of doing this, is to just, if I put out a video and someone happens to listen to it and it connects something, some dot in their head, then I've done enough. I've done more than enough, I believe. So excellent. Let's just jump into it, Tom. I've heard bits and pieces of your history, from your time when you were a town manager and some of the things that got you in hot water and, but would
Sure.
you mind for our audience kind of just giving us a little bit of who's Tom Kawczynski and how did we get to the point where you're writing books about secret societies and their interconnected, all these, how, like you said, all of these threads are interconnected between finance, government, politics, technology, all of it.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's a great question. I don't know is the easy answer. The longer answer is I ended up in Jackman, Maine. Now, Jackman, Maine is a town of about 700 people that is literally, they had a sign on it. It's 57 miles from the nearest stoplight. Not a place you go to get attention. And I had moved, I'd spent many years in Pennsylvania. That's why I went to college. My wife and I moved up there and I became a town manager of a sleepy town using skills I'd had. I used to work for a government contractor as a logistics guy in another shadowy life where I learned a lot of things, which maybe gives me a perspective on things. But I ended up going up there to try to improve this small town, which I have fond memories of, although, it ended up being a big kerfluffle, as they say, because I had said things publicly they didn't like. And I'll tell you what I said. Actually, there were three things I got in trouble for. One was I said Islam has no place in Western civilization. And I'm a historian by training. I can actually explain how the concept of Europe was formed in opposition to the Crusades, the Reconquista, as it were, of Spain. And I still believe that. I am an unapologetic Christian. I believe in the Lord Jesus Christ as my savior. I talk about that in respect to politics, all sorts of things. I'm actually a Christian monarchist if you really want to get into the politics and ideology of it. And that's something that has evolved since then. But when I was back there in Jackman, the left-wing media decided they needed someone to go for. And I said that you can't keep targeting whites and that Islam doesn't belong in the West. Well, you can imagine they weren't too happy about that. And so the funny thing of the story is that they kept coming after me and said, well, you have to resign. First, it was the people in the local paper, the Bangor Daily News, who literally hired an activist with a New Jersey phone number to run a hit piece on me because, hey, they were bored. They needed a story in Maine, 94% white at the time, to say that they don't want to have people like us there. And look, and people say, oh, he's this hardcore white guy. I'm just saying you shouldn't be picked on for being white. And that there's value. These are the people who built this civilization. I'm sorry.
To me.
The Iroquois weren't waiting here with an empire. And I love the Iroquois. I love everybody. I'm a Christian. I love everybody but Satan. That is one of the things people don't understand. But anyway, so they got mad. Then eventually it was the main stations. Then it was the New York Times. Then it was the BBC. And they wanted me to apologize. And as I told my wife, you can't apologize for the truth, because even if you do, the people who would have agreed with you will think you're a coward. And the people who hate you are just going to make an example out of you. So you get stuck playing a pariah and an avatar. So enters my life where I end up getting fired, or technically I ended up getting dismissed, which worked out okay for me because I got a settlement, because I had a contract, because I was a government employee, and also because I was technically actually unemployed, the way that worked out, because of a settlement, not a severance, which, because, once upon a time I worked in a courtroom, so you learn things. So, and I feel bad for it, and I tried to give value back to the good people at Jackman. They didn't deserve that, and they deserved a counsel that wasn't pretending one thing behind closed doors, but that's neither here nor there. You learn that courage is a rare commodity. So what happens is 37, 38 years old, whatever I am back then, it's a couple years back now, and what happens is you don't have a chance often in life, before COVID anyway. People work to live, and they live to work because you got to pay bills, you got to meet ambitions. And it rarely happens that you reach a point in life where no one wants to hire you, no one wants to talk to you except for people with agendas. And you're sitting there thinking, how did the world get to this point? And I'm actually grateful that two things happened. I got to start thinking about how the world is this way. And I got to a position where people relied on me to tell them truth, and they would pay me for it. I mean, who could imagine this? I mean, every other job in existence, you get paid to lie, right? You're a politician. You tell people what they want to hear. You're a broadcaster. You pay propaganda, all these things. A model, you say, oh, yeah, no, this is really comfy. I'm happy eating a broccoli shake. All of these things. this is the reality of it. And for me, it wasn't that way. So I got to speak truth. And that's what led me to my first book in this new cycle, which was Someone Has to Say It, The Hidden History of How America Was Lost, which is a sort of a light review of what happened in the 20th century, talking about the Fed, the passage of the IRS, all these things that libertarians would know about and a lot of other people. And I've been going deeper. At this point, literally, I'm not even kidding. Before I came on the show, I was looking at the Canaanite roots of the Venetian banking clans, going back to Phoenicia and various. And this is what I do. I like to think, and people always ask me when they listen to my shows, because they move very fast, how do I do it? And the answer is I can't help myself. My brain runs like a hamster on meth in a wheel. I can't stop myself from doing these things. So I come on and I share through humor and through commentary what I'm actually seeing in the world. And what I see is a Western civilization tearing itself apart. And I spent a lot of time working through dissident circles, working on what was called the New Albion Project, and the idea of a separate movement for New England to break away from the United States and to reclaim our roots. And as I studied those roots, what started out as a concept based on demography and my observations of culture, it discovered a much richer tradition, going back to the Puritans, going back to John Winthrop and Cotton Mather and all those things, and really an embrace of my own faith and learning to grow as a Christian, which many people in the dissident movement have, because, people start out with this idea. And I worked for Ron Paul in 2007, so I have street cred for that.
That's where I discovered the Fed. Ron Paul.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
was sitting here drinking shooters with G. Edward Griffin and Tom Woods. You want to talk about a good time in 2007? That's a good time, as we were out there complaining about G20 conference in Pittsburgh. This is, people don't know my ancient past, and I've been around as a dissident looking for answers. And what I realized is liberty without virtue is licentiousness, and how you determine virtue is a big part of the story. So as I started looking for what was good, you try different things. Is it an ideology? Is it a system? Is it a group of people? And what you find is that people are lousy everywhere. Even when we try to be, we can't help ourselves. And so you start looking to God for answers, and you ask and you look for that eternal wisdom instead of cleverness. And really, that's what started to govern my work a little bit. So I've been working, I've done the New England separatist thing, which I still believe is a good idea, by the way. But my latest books, In God We Must and Someone Has to Say It, really are books that tell two parts of the same story. And people don't often perceive that. But In God We Must is a story about human nature. It's based on, writings from the book of Mark and the Gospels. And it talks about why sin causes problems. People think things, if no one is hurt, how is it bad? And the thing is, you're hurting yourself because you're separating yourself from what you could be, what you could enjoy. And people don't perceive that. But after a while of letting everyone do what they want, when you realize you're living in chaos and the world's falling apart and you end up with Joe Biden as your president of all people, at some point you're like, let's do something else. And Come Out of Babylon is a story about how there is a system for everything, which doesn't allow us to be the creatures made in the divine image of our creator that we need to be, that is our best version of ourselves. So in all of that, people have had a chance to share my journey along the way. That is a continuing evolution of, we're watching Western civilization tear itself apart. I have been living on the periphery, and because I say things that are true, but and they're not even unpopular, they're popular, true, popular, and dangerous, but threatening to the regime, I've been a target. And every now and then when they want to make easy copy, or frankly, if I want to steal some books, I can go parade around somewhere, they say horrible things about me, people look what I say. Like, for instance, I'll give you an example. I ended up going to march against having a drag queen story hour at a child's reading thing from like 8 to 12 years old. Mm-hmm. And they were like, he's a horrible Nazi, he's against children being sexualized. I'm like, if that's how you define Nazism, there's going to be a lot of Nazis out there. And this is what I observed. They attack you for your virtues, and people just need to have the courage to stand on them. And what I've learned to do, and I think why people have supported me over the years, and I'm grateful for all their support, is because I've been willing to say the things that they won't or can't say. And when I say that, a lot of people do understand, and they're just afraid because they have consequences. And between me and my wife, we've learned to live quickly on the fly, and we've been blessed to have enough people who take care of us that I'm one of the few survivors out of dissident land who has been able to keep the faith. Of course, I do other things, and I write the books, I do the podcast, and I have a very generous donor base, of wide people who kick up $20-$40 a month, and they say, hey, keep on talking. And I figure for them, it gives them an extra boost, a little extra sugar to their coffee. So I keep doing it. In the meantime, I sit here and wait. And here, given the day, we're recording this late February 2022, I'm sitting here where I don't really worry about money, and I don't really worry about these things because, you know, we see Russia going into Ukraine. We see that our governments in North America are defining their own people as terrorists. Civil war is around the corner. And really the way I made it, my biggest book that was most successful was The Coming Civil War. I sold upwards of 25,000 copies of this. And what I was arguing was that there was a structural issue where there are certain fault lines that are leading us to conflict. In the same way Coming Babylon talks about systems, The Coming Civil War, what it basically says is we're going to fight over rural people versus city people because we want to live differently. Republicans versus Democrats, different ethnic groups, different, culture ways. If you're a traditionalist and a Christian versus a progressive atheist, you cannot live together because there isn't a common truth. And this has been what I've been stumbling towards. And really the heart of my own work is in seeking the truth. What is the unity that brings it together? And if you're going to look for good, it's going to be, you're going to say, why, or fight to the death for something arbitrary. You say, God knows, let's try to listen. And I've fallen in the second camp. And I think a lot of people have gotten there because when we look at the long march through the institutions and what was lost, the problem wasn't that the American state is the bad. It isn't that the Constitution is bad or the Bill of Rights is bad. The problem is we have bad people. And we have bad people because they don't have any belief. And we're all bad, but people who are bad who think they're good are the worst. I'm bad. I know I'm bad. I admit I'm a bad. I come on every morning and tell you what a piece of crap I am to remind you that there's a chance and an exhortation to improve yourself. And that sort of humility, that sort of eagerness and hunger, people who need to be humble. Because once upon a time, we were frontiersmen, we were settlers, and we were people, or we were workers who worked hard, and we really gave something up. And now we expect everything to be given from us. And you know what? When you have that sense of entitlement, people think of entitlement as welfare. Entitlement is an attitude you have about how your society exists. And if you can begin to get yourself out of that, maybe then you can restore your civilization. If not, you let the Chinese do it for you, and then you become a footnote in history. And I don't want to see that happen. So we keep the conversation going.
Yeah, you're spot on with that. We are an immoral people. The Constitution, things like everyone wants to blame capitalism or all these different things, but a lot of this stuff, it comes down to the way people use it. And if people don't have a cohesive moral understanding of reality, it's never going to work.
And then you get to the question of how do you construct that? And the answer is it's either arbitrary or it isn't. And we live in an age where we treat everything as relative. So we end up in humanism. And if you accept humanism as your basic operating principle, you inevitably end up in this sort of communist formulation that goes a bit like this. The best outcome is that which has the most utility to the most people to do whatever they want with the least encumbrance. And then you end up where you go down the transhumanist path saying, I want to be a robot so I can live forever, doing whatever indulgence I have. But you end up being divested of the connection between generations. You break down family bonds. You break down community bonds because you're not fighting for something larger than yourself. And it's a simple thing. You go back to Plato. If you can imagine things bigger than yourself, they probably exist. And we live in a world where we don't accept that there are mysteries. We think everything is relative. We think things are subjective. Like I do a prayer at the end of every program. And one of the things I often say to people in private conversation is that, why is it we go to God last for solutions? We go to science. We go to technology. You think God doesn't know those things? He invented them. He created them. But we are so, I'm going to do it on myself. Like we're like a 3-year-old child. I got it. You know what? Take a step back. Aim for wisdom. And in wisdom, you're going to find truth. And the wisdom is to admit what you don't know, ask questions, and to work together to help the people who are around you. And that organic development of how you help people and investment in one another, that empathy, to be honest with you, is the single biggest thing that works against our civilization. We say we care for people, and so we pay for them to go away. Don't pay for them to go away. It's dismissive. It's rude. Help people. And if you have to live humble, I live modestly. I'm lucky I got this stupid heater working behind me. You can see, you guys can't, but I have a broken water heater. It's broken so many times. And this summer, if you go back and listen to my episodes, you can listen to how I went 90 days without electricity and managed to keep my wife, which is the most remarkable story of the whole thing.
I remember I was listening that whole run where you had no electricity and you were just, I think it had to do with like heating water. And you were like, am I going to do am I going to take a bath? Am I going to wash dishes? Like it was.
We've only had hot water back consistently for 3 days, so knock on wood that'll stay with us because we bought a fixer-upper, you know. And I'll tell you, I'll tell you the honest truth. I don't say it to a million people, but I'll say it here. You know, we were living in a more communal type environment with some people who were political allies, and we did it because we wanted to, because we had come out of the dissident right, the alt-right, whatever you want to call it, and they got mad at us for being Christians, which is a crazy thing. But you know, that's what Christ said, enmity with the world, because they want to fight for this world. And the thing is, it's a means-based revolution, I argue for. If you don't put the means before the end, you can't fix this world because you're not fixing yourself. And this is the root of everything we talk about, because people are not comfortable talking about morality because they can't get their arms around, how do I say my morality's right and your morality's wrong? So we say, oh, well, I have to quantify things. What difference does it make how many numbers you put on something? You might as well be doing Kabbalah blood magic. That's not what's important. What's important is the intention you have and the fact that you approach God with a servant's heart. And you know, the way I look at it is I've studied all the big religions, and Jesus makes sense to me that, you know, man was so messed up that God had to come down here and literally sacrifice himself so that he wouldn't have to destroy all of us. Sounds like a crazy story. Spend time in politics. You'll have that view of people. And then you begin to look for a way out and a way to help one another. And when you stop fighting for this world and you start fighting in this world for something else, that leap of faith, you know, that Kierkegaard talks about, if you want to go into the philosophy of it, then you have the courage to speak and stand up, much like the people who founded America did, and many of the people who built Western civilization. They had a ground to stand on because they were willing to say to others, no, you're wrong, and this is why. And the biggest thing I would encourage people to be willing to say is when someone says, well, you don't disagree, like, no, you're wrong. What do you mean I'm wrong? Say that you're wrong to people and stand on your beliefs, and don't be afraid. And look, you get punished for this, but don't be afraid to change your beliefs if someone makes an argument that's persuasive to you. Absolutely. I've done that. I've lost my audience 3 times, but got it back 4. So some people have stood with me. Some people have gone away, but this is what's going to be required. And as things become crazier out there, we are going to live in a world where our economic delusions are shed from us. The dollar isn't going to buy anything in a few months from now. You can already see that when you go to the store. You can see structures of government are only protecting the last looters as they go out the store. The same looting that we saw in Minneapolis is happening in the Rotunda. The only difference is they wear nicer clothes. Probably. But that's where we're at. And you know, and what's the alternative? Because we're still going to have to live here. We got to start talking about that. And that's what I do with my show. I'm talking to people, I'm reaching out, and we have a community of brilliant people. I presume you do as well, because the type of questions and things, and you'll build it up. And we all have to help each other find the solutions. So, because we're going to have to live through this. And it's going to be hard. I mean, I'll be, my background, college. My degree is in history and political science is my minor. I have an honors degree from Swarthmore College, which is very fancy, and I'm sure they'd disown me if they knew I was talking about them. I have all the credits with the exception of the Latin credits for medieval studies. That was my specialization. It's only because in college, I was not a Mainer. I was a Pennsylvanian, so I stayed up to 3 a.m. as opposed to as a Mainer, I get up at 5 a.m. So I couldn't get up for Latin classes, which I wish I would have, but I was lazy back then. And in college, I was imbibing substances, and that's what you do when you're in college.
That's true.
Not good, but it's true because you're 20 and your liver will let you get away with it. So what ends up happening is I end up spending a lot of time about looking at a society where people may not have as much knowledge, you know, book knowledge, but what ends up happening is everything had a place, everything had a purpose. And we see the fall off of the old system and how people rebuilt the world around them, much like a Gibbon view, you know, the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. So now we're at a spot where, oddly enough, as opposed to law and economics, my understanding of the collapse of societies ended up being practical and useful. Who puts that as their career path? No, I'm betting on civilizational death on the bingo card. But as we are here, as we've walked this strange path together, which isn't that hard to understand because we have become so far from what we could be. We don't even ask the question, should we do things? We do things without thinking, oh, it's a new thing, I have to do it. Why? You know, I'm not saying you have to be an Amish, although they are probably closer to right than we are in many ways. And that's one of the arguments I make. Ask if something serves to your benefit before you start mindlessly doing it. And when we look at this civilizationally, which is what I've kind of learned to do, I'm trying to ask these questions and trying to put pieces together. And that's what my volumes of works are really about, an understanding of what happened, what went wrong, and some alternatives like the New Albion books offer of how we can build alternate structures. And through that, discovery. I've talked about the law, I've talked about the economics, I've talked about the politics, but really the thing that I guess I love most is the deep history of it, in the sense that then you can understand how we got here and how we keep repeating these same problems. And what you eventually find, it's the fact that we put every intermediary between each other instead of actual care and concern in a way that transcends base humanism and doing what you want to do, but instead saying you and I are together because we serve the same good. And to me, that's the only way you can structure a stable society, which is something so fundamental that never gets described at any political broadcast. Because if you have, even Lincoln said, a house warring against itself cannot stand. And we've had that. We've encouraged that. We said, oh, diversity is our strength. No, it isn't. Unless you have a common factor pulling you together. We live in a society without glue. It's a problem.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This idea that we can all live together with no shared common, at least superstructure. We don't have to agree on everything, but if we can't agree that we all believe in God, then it's not even going to work. There's no way.
Well, what we've believed in is money, and now the money doesn't buy things. So what's going to happen?
Everything good. You just follow the money every single time. It's always you follow the money, and it always makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, and you know what? I'll tell you the truth. I stopped following the money. I got offered 2 months ago a job that would help make our life easier. It would help me take care of things for my wife. And I sat and I prayed about it. I was like, Lord, what do you want me to do to spread your work? And God's answer was very simple to me. And this is an answer I think applies to everybody. Because I have conversations with God because I seek him. That's important.
Yeah.
God can't talk to you. God doesn't have the ability to do that. He set the universe aside and said, oh, that's a mistake. Let's go away. That's the devil's thought. So he said to me, what can you do that will allow you to serve me better? And the way I serve people, and this is weird, but this is my actual self-conceptualization, is I tell people how to survive the world so they trust me, why you can't trust the world so they get out of it, and then offer them an alternative in the works of the Lord Jesus Christ. That's how I actually perceive it. And as we come together and see that we who are apart can see things more clearly because we're not in the world, we have that detachment. There's a much bigger difference. It's like not seeing the forest for the trees. As you take that step back and say, wait, why do we do these things in the world? Why do I have these impulses? Paul said in the New Testament, why do I do the things when I know I don't want to do them? And how many of
and why don't I do the things I want to do?
like fasting, perfect example. How many people, you had no fat November and all those things, and I'm just picking things. We have these self-destructive habits. And the reason we indulge those sins is because it feels good because the pressure is off to do good. We're just as bad as everyone else. But when you start walking that path towards something higher, your life gets weird. You get attacked. And yet you become that select few, that elect few that is the only basis on which civilization has ever been founded. The man who strives for something greater and tries to overcome himself. And that's what I would encourage people to seek to do. And it's something that's available to everybody, not through our grace. You don't have to be strong enough. That's what you got Jesus for. We tried doing it on our own. The Old Testament is a 4,000-year story of the most stubborn people in history failing at trying to do anything good.
Yes.
So let's do it a different way.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's so true, especially when you try to do and improve yourself and move towards your values, people will attack you. And I got that experience before I returned to Christianity, before I even had any clue about the information that we found in some of your books that you mentioned. As I started to try to improve myself, I became separated from the crowd of people who were fine doing whatever the status quo happened to be. And I lost all of my friends over time. I became the pariah in whatever group I was in, or the past friends. They don't want to be a part with you. They're not happy for you. They don't want to look at themselves the same way you're looking at yourself, because you're trying to do something and move towards something you believe is better than the situation you're in. And you're totally right about following money as being completely empty, because the only career move I've ever made in my life, purely based off of money, was 9 months of nightmare. It was the worst. It was the worst decision I've ever made in my life. And I realized I had to get out of there. Like, this is not what's important. Like, trying to get a bigger paycheck is not important, because look at all the things I need to trade for it. And I'm not willing to trade these things. I'm not willing to compromise what I believe is true and what I believe in about myself to be true for a paycheck, just to live somewhere I don't even really want to live.
And you find that that's the case with any of the sins you chase. Like, let's say you chase lust instead. There's nothing worse than a guy running around like a puppy dog chasing a girl who doesn't want him, you know? You come from Big Cow Chats land where, you know, Lamprey loves to talk about that. And I'm going to get him set up with a wife at some point so that he has to suffer the ultimate indignity of being happy and enjoying it, because men and women are meant to be together.
Agreed.
But the thing about it is men and women have been set at war against each other. And that's what you begin to see. This division in all things that is artificial. You know, we call it in politics the Hegelian dialectic. But in spiritual terms, this was the battle of good and evil, going back to the tree of knowledge. Satan went ahead and said, hey, here's some secret knowledge. Take this. And this, and forever we've been chasing secret knowledge. The real work, the gospel, is always simple. And like, I'll tell you a story I said I was going to share with you. You know, my book, Coming Civil War, there was a meeting of a Boston Tea Party group because, you know, and people are a little erudite in Massachusetts. What you would expect of mass holes is accurate by and large, right?
My sister lives there, so absolutely.
So that you know exactly
I do.
the problem I'm talking about, all right? So anyone who's been there 10 minutes, imagine California with a nasal accent and the idea they think they're better than you. That's Massachusetts. And I say that with love. I have a lot of friends.
And terrible roads.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, they call them cow paths because they were cow paths. There's a set of loops. I can't get to the center of that city for the life of me. I still can't, but hey, I'm not jabbed, so I wouldn't even go there if I could. But anyway.
Yeah, they wouldn't let you in.
The story of it is, so they were having a meeting, and this one professor was at a meeting. He's like, well, I don't know why anyone would read his book, referring to me, The Coming Civil War. It's written for like a sixth grader to understand it. And one of my fans at the time said to him, well, that's why people read it, because they can understand it. It doesn't bore them to tears like your crap. And that's what I try to do. I write at a simple level. You know, the most successful book in history is the Bible. It's a series of aphorisms and metaphors and parables. It's written simply to understand. And by the way, if you've never understood the Bible, get some farm animals. All of a sudden, the whole world opens up. I mean, I have sheep. I didn't have sheep with sheep near us, but we had goats and have chickens. As it's infamous in my show, you'll hear roosters crowing and all this stuff. Because I'm trying to keep my wife happy, so I punish my audience. But you know what they say, happy wife, happy life. But the truth of it is, the best messages are often simple. And, you know, there is something for a common sense wisdom. Even if you read in the Bible, you know, the book of Ecclesiastes, at the end of it, Solomon reckoned the wisest man, king over all these things, that happiness is knowing what you're doing in the Lord. I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what it says in Ecclesiastes 12 and 13. And that's all we can know. That at some point we have to accept that we don't know everything, and instead we do the work. And that's one of the encouragements I would give to our audience. And one of the things I've had to learn, it took a very long time, to get out of your headspace, to get away from technology, like I say, and come out of Babylon and start living it. Grow a garden, get a chicken, can some food, do something. You know, fight with this stupid furnace over here that's been, I don't know how much I spent on trying to fix it. But you know what? At least I'm living. And in life is a short experience. The only thing you have that's actually limited is in time. So use your time wisely, reach people where you can, speak truth, and seek higher truth. And if you keep doing that, that's the good life. And that's what we need to seek, and encourage one another to seek. And the thing about it is, you know, sort of cliche way to say it, but instead of cutting up a pie, you're baking something bigger where you can bring more people in. And the people who've come into our community for what I've been doing have been an absolute blessing, because they can follow that. But I mean, people are scared. They're scared of giving up the world. And you know, in the Bible, it talks about this. The Lord says, if I have plans for lilies, would I not also have a plan for you? And what you find is, and I found that I fall upwards. I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills this month, and I don't really worry about it. It works itself out. And you start to learn things that the world is not what it seems to be. And, you know, if you really want to get crazy, you know, you can listen to one of my schizo streams in the evenings where I've been known to go on benders and share things about the secrets of the universe. And whether I'm insane, brilliant, or both, you find that at the end of the day, the fool is the person who has wisdom, because they know what they don't know and they're willing to ask questions. And the other thing I encourage people so strongly is that what gets people in so much trouble is that the things they think they know that are not true. We have so many assumptions, and not even that, things that are foisted upon us. I mean, you go through your life, you go to high school, you go to college, you watch things on social media, you watch things on TV, whatever generation you grew up, and you're told all these things that must be true, history. And what you find, if you really do the work, and you got to do the work, they're lies. They're lies on top of lies, and then you get to the first lie. You get to that very first lie, which is that, like, there's some secret knowledge. It's not meant to be this complicated. We make it that way. And there's advantages. I'm not saying there isn't, and you can enjoy these things. But usually the answers are simple and elegant, I find. And if you're willing to seek them out, they will come to you. But people aren't willing to seek them because in pride, they say, I'm going to force my way through this. I love tenacity. I'm a stubborn son of a bitch. I get it. But there's a time when you have to be willing to ask and help others. And I guess that's been one of my struggles as someone who came out of the dissident right, because the right wing, I would define the right generally as more individualistic, and I would define the left as more collectivist. And that has been our big failure, that we say, well, we are morally correct, and we are doing the right thing for ourselves and our own, so we're going to ignore you. And so we ignored it while they took over the media, and when they took over the woke corporations and capital, and now we live in a hellhole. Because we ignored everything, and we're sitting here being like, what the hell happened? We were doing the right things. Where did the world go? And so we have to figure out a way to be collectively engaged with one another. And for the people on the other side, because there's a lot of ex-leftists who come out of this realizing that all the collectivism led to just insanity, you have to seek for truth too. And somewhere there's a reconciliation, a new center to be defined. And that's what I think we need to be seeking now. And that my own work stumbles toward that question, like we're spiraling down a drain. What's at the bottom of that black hole?
Yeah, that's a really good point you brought up about the alt-right, because that's exactly what I noticed when I was in sort of that world in the 2012 to 2014 range was they could never work together. You know, there was no ability to work together. Everyone was punching right, as they said. You know, they would never team up. They couldn't get past whatever particular issues. They were just like, no, it's our way or the highway.
Precedent, isn't it? If the Germans had armed the Ukrainians instead of going against them, what would have happened? You know, and that's the problem. The alt-right settled on a bad idea: racist religion. Yes. And there's nothing wrong with loving your people. I stand by that. I
completely agree.
That I die. But you don't get to the point where you make man into God himself and expect good outcomes, because then you're enshrining all the flaws at the heart of it. I am the Superman who needs no one. So when the horde of ants swallows you, as happened, then this is what happened. That's how the Russians won Stalingrad. They don't learn from their history because they're in love with their own ideology. And I'm like, this is not the answer for me. And I got lumped in there. So, you know, you get lumped in. If you get thrown in a prison cell with some people, you might ask a couple of questions. Hey, what are you in here for? I'm in here for wrong thing. Oh, what are you in here for? So that's how my own walk went. And they threw every label at me. And I looked at the history of it. And yeah, the Germans have been presented as an artificial bad guy in a lot of these things. They have a lot of good points about things. And the biggest reason they got mad is they went against the banks. Nonetheless, that doesn't excuse some of the awful things they did, including the Rural Society, if you look at it. And you have to be willing to call it the good and the bad. But in politics, what I find happens in that world is people get stuck in pride, defending positions and defending relationships to the point where they defeat their own arguments. And you have to be willing in this world to be more of a mercenary if you're going to seek the truth. And I say that, but it comes to a point of how you socially organize, because as you stated, I agree with you, it fits my own experience, and it fits my experience of the libertarians as well, that you have the problem of how you bring people together who are connected, who are genuinely concerned about doing the right thing instead of feeding the most mouths. Because in the end, the leftist argument is very quantitative, right? We're going to give you as much as we can manage, as much as you want, and whether that's in terms of imagined identities, which is insanity, but that's fine. Or if it's in terms of, you know, economic welfare, which is how they used to look at it in the old days. We have to offer something different. So we have to find what that virtue is. And what we have to do is keep asking why until we get to the highest possible value. And if you accept that, it's like I said something that surprised people the other day. My first love is for Jesus. My second love is for my wife. And what I say to that is, you know, you could look at the original breaking up of the way our social structure was. Go back to the 1830s, the Romantic movement, saying, I love you so much, I would die for you. I would do anything for you. No, you're not doing them a service. I want to be suffering. I want to be miserable. I'm going to simp for you. No, don't do it. Don't go on OnlyFans, ladies and gentlemen. You know this. What you need to do is uphold them, uplift them. That's what the Lord teaches. And you do that by standing your ground when you know you're right. And when you're not right, be willing to accept correction. And what do you agree upon? And you have to agree upon it. And you know what? We've had 2,000 years of wisdom that built a civilization. And we had Karl Marx, who was a dirty socialist, running around saying, hey, let's do these things differently. Why are we listening to him? Why don't we go back to what worked for us? And I will tell you, it's my own testimony. It works for me. And I'm as irredeemable a person as you've ever met, you know? And so
I'm right there with you.
Yeah, so I mean, but it's a collectivism, because if you accept, like my wife and I do, as an example, that we are both there to serve Christ, what happens is when we have an argument, we remind one another that this is our duty, and that brings us together, because she knows that's what's right, and I know what's right. So it doesn't matter. Dana doesn't say, you idiot. My wife's brilliant, but she's tough. I call her Attila the Nun, and it's a loving joke, but she's tough. She's German. And I'm Russian, so you can imagine how it goes. You know, you don't want to be Poland in this. So we have conversations, and she'll be like, no, that's right because I said it has to be. You know, and we're like, okay, so then we agreed to have that referee that is not the state, because when you make the state the referee, tyranny is inevitable.
Yes.
That's just the way it could become fast, it could become slow. We make God the referee of when we disagree. And you know what it has done? It has brought us together. It has allowed us to reach out to others. And I cannot speak highly enough to it. I mean, even if you have issues, you have addiction, whatever, you know what? Try going through your life thinking you're disappointing Jesus when you're doing something bad. That works a lot better than 10-stepping, my opinion. And I'm not knocking people who have different ways. I understand some people need help in different ways, but it's a way of reorienting your priorities in the world. Instead of the ends justifying the means deliver the ends. And you become the sort of person you want to be because, hey, you're trying not to have your soul die. That's one thing, and that's pretty strong. But on the other hand, you're trying to do the work in life. And what's the work? The work, you know, if you read the Bible, it teaches you you're bringing in the harvest, bringing people to awareness of the Lord. And that's what I do. I go out there and I tell you all the details of why the world does the things it does, why it's going to work or not work, who's going to win and who's not. But at the end of it, we're all going to die. So we're obsessed over shit that's not going to matter. It's 100 years from now.
Yep.
Instead of worrying about what will matter for the next million years. And if there isn't that, let's say you don't believe that, you believe there's nothing, well, then how the hell are you going to keep yourself from going insane? I mean, such nihilism. Yeah. I mean, and you know, it's a vain nihilism, right? Because you're basically saying that the world's a random accident. It's a mistake. We just happen to be here. And, you know, if you can believe that, you're a totally different person than me, because I look at the improbabilities of all the things that exist, and I cannot help but see an intelligent design behind this. And I think, you know, we've been afraid to fight that. We say, oh, well, you know, this belief is as good as that belief. No, it isn't. Why do we assume that God, who created personalities, doesn't have one? Why do we assume God, who puts such detail into things, isn't particular about what he believes? And if you look at all the faiths that are out there, what is the one that has the most honest assessment of human nature? If we can't know God, we can know ourselves. So you look at who explains humanity in the way we actually behave and says how you deal with that problem. And God literally says in the Bible, humanity is so bad that you couldn't follow 10 basic laws. I had to come down, get murdered by you to get around the fact that you can't even exist around me. Oh, and that's the world we live in. I understand that world. That's relevant to me. And people don't want to follow people. And you know, and look, I know plenty of very nice Christians who go out there and say, I go out, I love Jesus, and I sing it. And I'm not speaking against them, but a more vigorous version, like I can do, because I was a terrible sinner. You name the bad sin, I've done it. Yeah. I've even done ones I would never admit to. And it's not about, you can't earn redemption, but you can say, God, forgive me. I'm sorry. I understand now. Because sometimes you have to plumb the depths to come back up. And I think a lot of us who are in the political sphere have this pride that we're like, this is our ideology. This is our belief. This is how we're going to solve it. And what I'm telling you is any of those are fine. With the right people, I would rather have a terrible system with great people than a great system with terrible people. And that's the point I try to make to people.
A thread that I keep hearing is humility. That's what I keep getting from a lot of what you're saying, is that you need humility. And I totally, that resonates with me, because that's exactly what saved me. I used to think I knew everything. I used to think, oh, I paid attention in school and read these books. I know everything. And then you go out into the world, and reality and the interactions with people, it's not how you're taught at all. And then you realize, like, these old stories that you used to think were so below you and so ancient, and people were dumb back when they wrote them, they know way more about humanity than anything that I was taught in school growing up. And I thank God my parents raised me Catholic. And even though I was a terrible sinner, still am, and fell away, I've been trying everything I can to get back to it, because it's all true. And I needed the humility. I needed terrible things to happen to me that I would even stop and consider maybe I was wrong. But without that humility, I'd never be where I'm sitting right now. And I certainly wouldn't be happy. I'm so much happier than the person I used to be.
Well, you know, when you think about that in the Bible, there's the parable of the prodigal son. I actually do preaching on
was
Sundays.
Just last Sunday. We had Prodigal Son Sunday, and
Exactly.
amazing.
And you know the story then that, Christ, it's a story of a young man who leaves his father, and he has a brother who constantly stays there and works with him, and the prodigal son goes away, and the father slays a fatted calf for him when he comes back home to celebrate that his son who was lost and wasted all his money came home, and the other son's mad. I was doing the right thing all along. Why don't you love me? He's like, you were never lost. He was lost and he's been reclaimed. What a joy. And literally, it says in the Bible, is singing in heaven when a sinner comes back into the fold. And because we go into the world and we seek these things, like you say, and we have to go through this process, this shedding of the things we think we know. And it is in humility that we begin to realize we don't have the answers. And, I think part of the problem is, we live in a society, and this is the real terrible thing about the West, where there is a solution for everything. And I honestly see the work of Satan in it. And in this sense, that when you have technology to anticipate, accept, solve your every need before you can think about it, you have no time to think and be the discomfort. And I would suggest to people, sometimes a little bit of discomfort does more good. When have you ever learned something from when things go well? When things go badly, when you suffer, when you're wrong, when the whole country says, I hate you, you learn things about yourself. And what you learn is what you can rely upon. And, I had this preacher once who said something real smart to me. He said, when everyone hates you, you got a friend in Jesus. And that's really the truth of it. And these stories are about people who lived in a world where suffering was a reality. And what I would say to people is, you're coming into a world that's going to be like that. Hyperinflation is it's coming into being.
Oh,
we
yes.
have technological tyranny, digital passports. I personally think that what's happening with COVID is going to get a lot of people sick. I don't want to tell it too much because I know the channels get in trouble for that. But
Sure.
If I really went into it, I believe we're going to see a lot of people die from that. A lot of people suffer. And I think the inclusion of technology into people is part of what's wanted, because the promise that the system makes you, and whether you want to blame the socialists, the transhumanists, or you want to think it's Satan, is that I have a better kingdom in creation than God. Come into my metaverse, come into Metatron's heaven, come into all of these things. And you start to see, as you gain in spiritual wisdom by looking at the parables and understanding, by reading again and again, asking the Holy Spirit to guide you, you begin to see in that book and in the stories of people like that, the experience of humanity. And there's two ways you can learn. You can learn through the experience of making mistakes, which is what we do 99% of the time, or you can learn from the knowledge of other people's mistakes. The Bible will save you a lot of time if you're willing to read it. And some mistakes you have to make on your own. I genuinely believe that, because you can't know what you don't know, and because you've been taught that there's a solution to all things. But some things are, and that's one of the things that I constantly work on, that learning to accept that there are mysteries that I'm not meant to know, and to ask God to fill in the gaps. And you know what? Sometimes it's like, let me put this in as mathematics. Let me go schizo on you for a little bit. One of the things that I've always been obsessed with is the square root of -1. This number obviously exists. It must exist because it's a concept we can define. But if I ask you what the square root of -1 is, you have no idea. It's imaginary. And yet, is it not possible that maybe imagination, because we are quantum computers, if you really think about it, that we as an active consciousness can transcend space and time? This happens. You can see experiments. There's a ton of them in science. You can literally imagine something into being. So we exist in a place that is neither yes nor no. It is a possibility yet unrealized. And what is faith? 2 Corinthians. Faith is the belief in things unseen. If you reach in there and grab, and you let God fill in those gaps, I have plans to prosper you, where 2 or more gathered in my name, all of these things, there's an opportunity. Miracles begin to happen. I watched my sick wife dance with me on Christmas Day. She can't do that, but she did. You know why? Because nothing is impossible for a God of miracles. And if you are willing to believe, and people, let's sort of believe for a second, because this is one of the things people always say. I know a lot of people are culturally Christian. I think it'd be nice to believe. We should believe in these things. I believe even when I don't want to. When I'm doing something bad and I'm sitting there and Jesus is like, oh, why are you doing this, Tom? Belief is when something becomes a fact and a reality. Not that you want to believe, but that you actually believe. And I would encourage people to try to walk that path of actually believing. And you know how you learn to believe? You take a chance, you take a leap, you do something you wouldn't have done. Maybe it's giving up a job, maybe it's getting out of town, maybe it's giving up the life you don't want but are scared to lose, and letting yourself see what God has for you. And if we can do that as individuals, as families, as a society, maybe with repentant hearts and humility, we can get this back. And that's the only chance we have, because there's no rational way to fix this. I can tell you rationally, and I do every day, you've listened to my program, all the different ways in which we're screwed. And there's one chance left for hope, a small and narrow path that is absolute truth. And I
Mhm.
want to pursue it as relentlessly as I can for what comes in this world as well as the next.
Amen. I'm with you on that one.
I like preaching. I never thought I'd be a preacher. That's part of the reason why I've grown this beard. I got this crazy idea, like Samson, like you keep growing the thing. There are
Gonna get your power back?
there are well, I didn't have it on the top of my head, right? So the thing about it is the neurons in your hair cells actually, all your memories apparently are accessible from any of your neurons. Apparently, it's a distributed system. Like people think of the brain as a singular system, and that the nerve cells are, a junction of wiring coming from the power plant. In truth, it's one system. That's when people say, "Oh, I have a gut feeling or an instinct." That's your gut brain that teaches you how to dance and not die by having bad things happen to you if you learn to listen to it. Instinct's a real part of your brain,
Yes.
or your central nervous system to be more broad. So when I'm growing my hair out with this gnarly beard that I have that makes me look like Methuselah, but that's fine. People take me more seriously because I look 20 years older than I am, and that's okay. You really do get a certain benefit from it, I think, because, I've done everything I can to overclock my mind because time is short and I want to help people, and I want to help myself. And if I say things that are crazy, it's because I'm willing to consider possibilities that others aren't. And I think when you do that, you will be surprised what you discover you actually believe. And don't just give up your belief, whatever it is, because others say you can't have that. Defend your belief if you believe it and convince others. And you don't have to agree with me. Maybe you can persuade me. Maybe you think I'm totally wrong. Persuade me. And that is how we rebuild civilization. That's sort of discourse. Otherwise, why would we come on here and talk, just so we can compare beards, Yours looks better than mine. Mine's scarier than yours. That's what but you got the emblem, so you're good. I have to work harder to look scary. I look like something out of a West Virginia nightmare.
It's fascinating. You were talking about the long hair. I was reading something once upon a time about how the Native Americans they believed that they could sense more of the world when they kept their hair long. And it was fascinating to me. That is,
it makes sense. I mean, think how insects have antenna. You do sense certain things. There is a awareness. Like if you're right, so we both got beards. If you play with your beard, you can feel it. You can feel the wind and you can feel temperature. You are giving yourself access to more stimuli and you are giving yourself the ability to process that. That's a real thing.
Yeah. And you were talking about following your gut, like your instincts, how, these things are real, and we have been taught or acculturated or led astray to not register these things. And we also have become so, I think, like overstimulated or put into such cynical mind frames that we don't see miracles. Like miracles happen all the time. We just don't look at them that way. Every time somebody is in some terrible situation and they come out of it, that's a miracle. It's a miracle that you survived this and have gone on, or you learn from it, or you're not the person you used to be. And people just want to poo-poo it as like, oh well, it was modern medicine, or it wasn't a miracle. That's just reality. And we
are blinded by our eyes. And in this world we live in particularly, I think you look at the history of the 20th century. First we were propagandized by sound, radio programs, but that was somewhat effective. But then they added, what's the old saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words, right?
Yes.
And we are so blinded by pictures. So you're staring at a screen watching it hypnotically. This is what TV was. You're so busy doing that, where is there space for your mind to think, because of all the processing that's just going into absorbing both the active message and the latent messages, whether they be propagandized advertising like Lipman would talk about a Bernays, or whether they be subliminal messages that were put in there. And what we find is that we are, like you said, we are hypersaturated, our dopamine, serotonin, and you can even look at this. You can read the studies, like how many people who worked in Silicon Valley won't let their kids anywhere near a smartphone because
absolutely.
And they did it, and everyone looked the other way because this was the goal of it. It was the goal of social media. This isn't here for us to be able to share truth. We're using it as dissidents and pirates. We got to get some eye patches going to go with our beards. But the reality is This is here so that they can watch us. And the internet that looked so happy and friendly when I was coming up as a kid in the 90s now looks at as the control measure of information inputs and outputs in a globally constructed system. And this is the challenge of it. You have to be willing to step outside of any system. If you've reached the point where you're so dependent on something like that, you really need to question what it is you're doing and give yourself the space, whether it's work, whether it's technology use, whatever it is, because there's a perspective you're missing. And as you begin to see that and you take a step back, give yourself time for prayer, for contemplation, just let yourself think. And in these last few years, the blessing I've had, and if I'm wise, it's only in this, that the Lord has humbled me so many times into not letting me get what I want, that I've had to really think about the way things are, why it doesn't happen. And I realized I'm chasing my own things vainly. And instead, if you're looking for miracles, the best way to find them is to do what he wants. The Lord's going to protect his own. If we're living in a time of chaos, I don't want to have Leviathan before me. I want to have Jehovah. I want to have the toughest guy backing me. And if I go home, I'll say, hey, I served you well. Well done, thou good and faithful servant. But it's the humility of serving a cause greater than yourself. And we don't know how to do that. And it's a hard thing to habituate yourself to thinking that you are doing things as a servant to something larger. Now, in the old days, when there were a lot of serfs and society was structured differently, we could do that. But now every man thinks he's his own God. Every man thinks he's his own master. And our elites more. And when you look at why this is falling apart, it's because everyone's rushing to be the greatest AI, the one who controls anything. Everyone wants the one ring. I want to throw that bastard in the fire until I skip it all the way past Mordor. That is where you got to get your mindset to if you want to have liberation. And the truth is, you're not going to save everyone. You're not going to save most people, but we happy few, might just find our way out of it. And, praise the Lord Jesus for giving us that opportunity. The words were there right in front of us. We were just too busy to care.
The religion of self is really the religion of the modern man. And that if you elevate yourself as God and you believe that you are God, it's never going to work.
No, but we do that. And now we look for technology to shield us from God, and look, the Bible said this, Matthew 24, it said it would be as in the days of Noah. What was the days of Noah? God got so mad at how awful men were. They were taking forbidden technologies dropped by angels. That's what it really says, that he flooded the whole world into oblivion. And you look at ancient archaeology, you can find all the things, study Atlantis, all the cool, weird stuff that we kind of talk about in esoteric circles. But at the end of the day, the story is people who disobeyed God. And you're going to disobey God a little bit. We're sinners. But that's why we have the gift of repentance. And when you're talking about humility and forgiveness, going to God and having that relationship where you talk to say, God, I'm sorry I screwed up again. Please forgive me. And the way you can do it, it's not like you can earn forgiveness, but a sign of good faith is you do the work. So when I come on, people say to me, so Tom, why don't you just talk about this and not bring that into it? Because that's what matters more. I don't really care. If we have the best politics, the worst politics, I'd rather live in a totalitarian hellhole where all of us are Christians, because then at least we're going to be on the other side of this. We'll be dead. Eternity will come faster. It'll be fine. It's your priorities in life, and your heart is where it is. If you're fighting for this world, you're going to fight for money because you want control. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen people surrender at the very beginning, the things that are most important to them, saying, I can't go there. I'm going there. And if you don't want to come with me, that's your loss. Now, I'm willing to talk about other things, but I'm always going to connect it back to what I care about. And this is, as a medieval scholar of some talent, I think, you've read my books, you can draw your own conclusions, and I know some of your audience may have. My argument is very simple, that we did ourselves a disservice in Western civilization 500 years ago because we separated out our belief structure from how we're running things. We gave the state power, we took morality out of it, came out of the Westphalian system, 1648, Catholics and Protestants fighting. And look, we still fight. If you're Catholic, I'm Protestant. I can sit here and argue theology to the point where you cry and convert. But that's not the purpose of today, as long as you profess the Lord Jesus Christ as your Savior. If not, then we're going to have a longer program. But what I would say to you is that we have to get to the point where we put that morality and that love of God and a specific version of God, not a namby-pamby, love everyone humanist God, because we cannot make God in our own image and be speaking truth. That is an impossibility, and people need to start talking about that.
Yeah, even the idea that there's objective truth is such a hard idea to get through to your average person these days.
Well, it's because it doesn't fit the experience of the world they live in. And that's really what you have to do. You simplify your life. You know, Christ says the meek shall inherit the earth. And what does that mean? It means that people who are not living with all those things, you know, if you could see, I'm sitting in the shanty of a back room right now. I've been living, you know, we spent living on space heaters this whole winter. And I used to make a lot of money, and I could make a lot of money. I could make calls and do that, but I've chosen to live humbly and simply. So when things fall off, I'm right there and I can land safely because I know what I'm doing and my life is deliberate. It makes sense. You know, it's like if you like the transcendentalist, a bit like Thoreau or Emerson, you're walking away from a system that you know doesn't serve you. And you have to be willing to shed yourself of comfort. You have to go into a zone where you're uncomfortable. And I think, honestly, as much as anything, comfort has been our addiction. You know, we're a bit like, you know, you start at the beginning of Western civilization, you know, Odysseus, he goes to the land of the lotus eaters and everyone wants to be comfy and be high. And look, I've been comfy and high. I understand how enjoyable it is, but you have to be willing to get out of there and go back and do the work with humility and pull yourself out of these things. And every day you do it. And if you can't do it, you ask the Lord to help you. And that's the truth. The truth is expressed by how you live, the vita activa rather than the pure vita contemplativa, you know, that they talked about in the Renaissance. You've got to be willing to go out there and do the work. And the work really starts with yourself. If you live in a world where you hate your life, but you're like, I have to get the money because I don't know how to survive. So start learning how to survive. Start being a homesteader. Start being someone who's closer to the land, because when things fall apart, it's like the West Virginians said during the Depression, we were so poor we couldn't tell the difference. But you know what they were? They were eating. And eating is a good thing. I'm going to be eating 6 eggs every day if I want to. That'll keep me afloat a long time. But it's not just because I'm trying to survive the world falling apart. It's because that world has to fall apart. You're building a Tower of Babel in your own minds of putting yourself up in the echelons of God because you have technology. And what happens is when that technology is taken away from you, what do you fear and trembling? And you're set naked before your God. And he's going to say, why were you doing this instead of doing that? So instead, I live poor. I tithe. I had $10 left in my wallet. I gave $5 away to a homeless person. Who knows? Maybe they were trying to scam me. But you know what? I would rather deal with the consequences of helping someone who needed it and accept that someone maybe took advantage of me. It's not that I'm naive, anything but. Be ye as wise as serpents, or serpents as gentle as doves. It's a different way of living where you know your higher obligations. You are here to help other people find truth. If you are doing that, you are doing the work, and that's something you can defend. Think of it this way, if you can think of it no other way. Imagine at the end of your life, you have to defend what you did and how you lived. Would you be willing to do that? If the answer is yes, God bless you. You're doing a good job. And if the answer is no, when are you waiting to change it? Because you're going to die sooner or later. I wouldn't want to wait till it's too late. It's not a threat. It's a reality.
Yes, absolutely. There are a lot of parallels to what you just said about what's going on up in Canada. You know, there were videos of people asking the truckers, how do you feel about them freezing your bank accounts? And most of the answers were like, well, there's nothing in it, so go right ahead. I'm doing what's right. This is about what is right.
That's it. And you know why they could do it? Because they made themselves independent. There are two types of people who are independent, the very poor and the very rich. Mm-hmm. If you're very rich, send me some money. If you're very poor, you don't worry about it anymore, because you know what are they going to do? Throw you in jail? It costs them more to jail you. Honestly, it really does. It costs like $60,000 a year to jail someone. So they let us linger, and we linger in these weird, interesting places. And I will tell you, if you've never had the joy of being poor, you meet interesting people who have interesting stories. And what did Jesus do? He hung out with fishermen and tax collectors. Could you imagine going to the H&R Block person and saying, yeah, come on with me. We're going to do a religion here. We're going to do a thing. That's what actually happened. So those are real people. And you know, what you find is a lot of poor people are poor because their priorities in life were not rooted in winning in the system. And if there's hope for people, I think it's for people who exist outside the system. That's why, you know, once upon a time, the left actually had a good idea in this sense in changing things, that they reached out to the working class because they did have that resiliency. And now we reach a point where they loathe them and they despise them because they have power. Right. Let's not despise them. Let's make them a part of the story. You know what? And look, there's always going to be an elite. It's the nature of things. It's the struggle of hierarchy in nature, and it's the world it's designed. You know, heaven's a kingdom, hell is a democracy. But this is one of the things that we have to learn to do, to be okay with being not okay and being vulnerable and being poor, so we can be spiritually rich. Because if you know how you're living, and if you're, let's just say, it's an oversimplification, but you got to make your life make sense to you. And I will say, to be fair, it's not easy. I mean, there are days, I have to worry about how I'm going to pay for my wife's medicine so she can survive. It's very stressful at times, but yet I have two choices. I could either say I'm going to go back to living in a world I hate as a bribe to keep her safe, which is honestly what a lot of people did with COVID. Let's be blunt. Or I could say I'm going to have faith the Lord will carry us through. And you know what? I'm still here. So, faith is a practice. It's a muscle that gets stronger with exercising it. And if you haven't been willing to take chances, honestly, civilization's not going to be here that much longer. If you're going to do it, now's the time, because you may not be able to do it later. And if you do it wisely now, maybe make some friends, do some things, you might make things not so bad. And when things fall off in this world, you can survive. And if it doesn't, at least you'll know you did something with the time that made sense to you.
Absolutely.
So I don't know. So as usual, I monopolize interviews. I know you had a series of questions. If there's anything else you want,
I did, but it's just been fascinating. No, I mean, we've been covering so many things.
People don't think I can do a conversation because I talk into the screen by myself. But the truth is, I always tell people who are friends of mine, you come up here to Maine, you get a cart of eggs. We have a good laugh, and people come up, like my friend Scott Howard actually came up here. Different people, and that's what we do, because I try to impart some wisdom. I don't do this for money. It isn't worth it, but you reach a point where you realize you're old one day. I don't know how to put it. Maybe it happens around 40. It's a warning to those who are getting close. And you realize, okay, now I got to help people. I got to share things. And all I have is what I've learned. And hopefully you can learn from my mistakes so that the ones you make serve you better. I'm not telling you not to make mistakes. I'm telling you to learn something from them.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. There's no way to avoid making mistakes. It's part of just being human. And if you're trying to avoid making mistakes, you're probably not doing any living at all.
And people do that. I was like that in my 20s.
I was like that too.
Bureaucrat government job. I literally took money at the welfare desk, which was a horrifying experience of seeing people who were just in a very bad mood. And it's not that they were on welfare, it's just the nature of being a system person. I always feel bad for government bureaucrats. I'm glad that I don't have to be one, and I work relentlessly to make sure it isn't that way again. But have empathy for people in their spots. You don't know what people are going through, and you forgive things, and that's how we can begin connecting together, because we need some glue. And if you want some glue, you got to make a connection first.
Absolutely. And that's what's really important is the connections you have with other people, because they're the only thing that's going to last. Like I've had a career for over 20 years, and what is the commonality? What's the only thing that's lasted are the friendships. The companies don't last. The projects don't last. Most of the companies I started in my my early 20s, they don't even exist anymore. But what
all
does
faith
what
does, it's absolutely true. And that's what's funny. People are fighting for death. If you're fighting for this world, you're literally fighting for death. And I don't want to fight for death. I'm going to fight for life. And I think that, and it sounds like an illusion to people. We're too cynical. We're cynical about the wrong things. You should be more cynical about the people who are promising you easy solutions, and less cynical that there are other ways to live. And I don't know how to say it. And I know I'm aware, because I've been on the other side of this, that a person like me sounds crazy. I'm well aware, and maybe I am crazy, but if I'm crazy and I'm happy and my life makes sense to me and I have a loving wife and I have purpose and meaning, then wouldn't you rather be also?
There was a time in my life where I would have thought that everything we're talking about is absolutely insane. There was a time in my life where I never would have even been able to speak of God, speak of morality, speak of these things. Something I realized when I was living in Seattle is that they worship death. And that concept would have been absurd to me 5 years ago or whatever. But I saw in everything, in all of it, it was a worship of death and a hatred of life. And if evil is real, then there has to be good.
It is true. And I would say for people who struggle with that walk, I always recommend, people say, different authors to read. C.S. Lewis is brilliant. Read Mere Christianity. Read this. Read the Screw Tape Letters. The Screw Tape Letters will give you a better feel than almost anything ever written. It's a very short, very easy, very fun book to read about a demon explaining to a lesser demon all the ways in which we're distracted from finding our way to God. That literally the most effective way to keep people from finding God is indigestion. Because if your stomach hurts, you can't think about bigger things. And it's a funny thing, but what it talks about is the pettiness of the world, and that there's always that next distraction, and that the trouble and the difficulty, and this is the hard work, is training yourself not to go forward for it, to step away, let it go. And sometimes you have to let that thing go. You have to drop the ring. You have to not grab for the grail. Using every movie reference I can think of from a lifetime. These are the decisions you have to make, and if you do that, you will find that you might yet survive. And I think it's a good way. And yeah, I mean, the occultism is crazy. I mean, look, I'm in New England, Salem, right? I've been there. I've been to Giles Corey's, stone where he was pressed and all that. And you see this everywhere. And when you start to look at the world through different eyes, Christians are born again. So what does that mean? It means you see the world in a different light. You begin to see all the things that are designed to trap you into this world, and you have the Holy Spirit now as an intermediary to give you a vision of things that is different. And if it doesn't make sense to you, I'm just going to say, try it before you deny it. It
Wise
doesn't
words.
cost you anything. It's someone who tried every other thing. Look, I did mysticism, I did dark magic, I did all agnosticism, and look, I can talk about secret knowledge till we're blue in the face. Talk about Stanley Hall, Alice Bailey, and it's interesting, and we all want secret knowledge, but one I'd rather have what God has for us. I mean, the question is, do you trust yourself to find the solutions, or do you want God to find them for you? And as a society in America succeeded because people literally came here promising, God, give it to us. And they asked for a 400-year contract. That's when they landed. That would have been 400 years as of last year. Okay. The landing in Plymouth Rock was 1620 or 1621. I forget which. They went there and they swore a covenant. And the Lord honored that covenant, and we were a rich and prosperous nation. And largely, even though our government wasn't, the people were good and prosperous up until relatively recently, when we let the propaganda state overrun us. And propaganda isn't just news broadcasts, it's TV shows that promise you different things. Go through your show, go through any show on TV with a Christian mindset, okay, and see what it's saying and see if it contradicts it. And why you will find, if you look, everything that's on TV, everything on radio, with a very few exceptions, they're very deliberate, anything that's mass promoted or popularized is against God, is against Jesus, against this vision, against wholesomeness. Like, when was the last time you saw a program that was about human achievement or success or building? We're making this religious here, just something excellent. But instead you get excrement. So if you float all day in shit, why do you think your world looks like a latrine? And that's what we do to ourselves. And we take things in. They say through the eye gate, through the ear gate. These are your nerves, and the densest branch of nerves you have in your body is your optic nerve. So they're constantly forcing you to go and take all this into you, and you take this poison. And look, every day we try to be Muad'Dib and turn it into the water of life. I get it. But you know what? Most of us sit there lying as worm food, and we got to change that.
Oh, that's a good Dune reference. That's excellent. Yeah, I've been steeped in entertainment my whole life. I made my entire living off of being, working in technology and entertainment. And you're right. When I decided to actively try to be a Christian, to walk the path, and to look at the world in the way Jesus intended us to live, I couldn't help but see my entire life in a completely different way. All of the entertainment, all of the stories, everything that shaped me into the person that I was up until that point is rotten and anti-Christian and anti-God in insidious ways that you couldn't even begin to start listening.
You don't see anything until you see everything.
Yes. Yes.
Because your world gets inverted. I used to joke that after a while you floated, after falling down the rabbit hole sometime for long enough, you learn to float upwards in it. Your whole world gets flipped around, and that's really the mindset that has to happen. And it won't make sense until you do it. And it's ultimately a choice. It's a leap you have to make. Yeah. And once you see it, I mean, I think a lot of people who listen to broadcasts like what you do, what I do, they understand the world isn't working. They're looking to make a bargain. They're looking to make a deal to survive and a way to keep the things they want and get rid of the other parts, and that's hard. And what I'm saying is, look, we all do that. I have plenty of shows I like to have things that I know are bad, like magic and all that. And we make compromises with the world to live. But what I'm saying is, if you don't know you're making those compromises, then you are just an object being acted upon by forces you don't understand. And I don't think anyone wants to be manipulated that way. And that's the way the devil does his wares. That's how he knows how to do that. They're smarter. I mean, these are superhuman intelligences. And in your vanity, think that we ants are going to go stand up against the mighty angels. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to ask for help. Not because I'm not smart. I am smart, but because I know my own limitations. And that's where the humility comes back in. And, yeah, we're all going to take a beat down here. I genuinely believe we're heading toward the end times as prophesied in the Bible. I've said that. Yeah. And part of tribulation, people of tribulation, why would God do something so awful to us? To wake you up to the fact this world is a dying place. It's his chance to remind you that in suffering, you have the opportunity to choose a different path and seek that which is true and eternal. It's like I always say to people, why does they say, how can God love you and have hell? Because you have free will. You have a choice. If you choose to choose that which is not eternal, that which is not true, is God supposed to exist forever sustaining something which is false and wicked? And you're like, who is he to judge? He's God. He made you. You're not delightful. But you know what? As it turns out, if you really search God, you find God's pretty fair. And the suffering that he has, it's only the greatest attribute of God, in my opinion, beyond his justice, beyond his strength, is his mercy. Mm-hmm. And that's the story of Jesus Christ, that he comes down and he's willing to say all these things and share all these truths and die blameless. And what a human way to be. And a lot of us have been blamed when it wasn't our fault. So we know what that feels like. Imagine if your whole life you were blamed for all the sins of the world, all that ever was and would be, and you died. My God, why have you forsaken me? Says the gospel. Even God himself couldn't handle that in that moment where he was fully human. And this is the battle. So you're fighting, your battle isn't with what's out there. So it's what's in here. You're fighting your own nature. And once you begin to win that battle, this whole world becomes a different place where things you couldn't even imagine you see become commonplace. And where things you thought were impossible are expectations you should have. That's the world that was stolen from us. Satan pulled the world over our eyes, and we got to learn how to get it back from him.
Well, that was extremely well said, Tom. And, I promised you that I would only keep you for about an hour and a half or so, and we're starting to get to that point. So I want to be respectful of your time. And at this point,
I will come back on again if you want at some point.
It's a good conversation. It'd be an honor, absolutely. So I think that this is probably a good time to start talking about the future of Tom Kawczynski, the future of Pineland. What are what's coming up in your life? Are you working on?
When they throw me in a jail cell, please come break me out. Pull a Bastille deck. I tell all my fans, I have no desire to sit there in a cell. I would love an angel to get me out like the Apostle Paul. I'm not as good a man as him, but nonetheless, I would love for you to come break me out. What am I going to do in the days ahead? I'm going to keep speaking truth. I'm going to try to help awaken people. And as this civilization falls apart and we head towards what I believe is going to be a bloody civil war soon, I'm going to do whatever I can do to provide leadership to help in my community, to help encourage other people to reach out, take care of one another, practical prepping tips, including spiritual preparation for battles ahead, and that I will continue. We'll see if there's time to write books. I mean, the truth is I've had to do a lot of geopolitics lately. That's something I specialize in. You can listen to this program and think that, I probably come and preach all the time. And I have my preachy shows on Sundays, but we literally do cover everything, including very hard geopolitics, because that's what I come out of as a tradition. So what's next for me? I'm going to go upstairs. I'm going to make a sandwich. I'm going to hang out with my wife. I'm going to have a nice, easy rest of the day. And I'm going to take the day as it comes, because we are now living in a world where it's one day at a time. Tomorrow is not promised to us. So I'm going to take time, get the most out of everything I can, and I encourage all of you to do the same. If you want to see more of how I think and help support the program that I do, like I said, Exit Strategy channel on YouTube, look up Tom Kawczynski. You can find me, and don't believe half the things they say about me. I'm not that scary. What else do I say? Amazon, you can find all my books. There's 13 of them. 4 of them are on Audible. You're certainly welcome to listen to that. There's enough content to keep you busy till your ears bleed here on YouTube. And if you want to interact with me, t.me/Atlantic Homeland. My email address is newalbion@protonmail.com. I'm really proud to have a AM radio license now, KC1QHL, because you gotta keep busy. And other than that, I think that is pretty much everything that I usually cover, other than to say thank you for being an excellent host. Congratulations on your recommitment to Christ. It's an excellent thing, and it gladdens me to hear that. And just keep the faith for everyone else who's out there. And if you ever want to talk to me, I'm not a hard guy to find. You're welcome to come say hello. And until then, I look forward to our next conversation that we can come forward. And if you want to hear from me, I'll be on there squawking with the chickens early tomorrow morning. And when you talk about Pineland, look, in reality, and maybe this will be the next conversation, I really do spend a lot of time thinking. My personal obsession is how do we build a society for those of us who believe so that we don't go down with the ship? I don't know the answer to that question, but I feel like it's a really important one. So maybe we'll let that percolate, people in the comments, and things for us to think about. So when we reconnect, maybe we'll find that answer. I mean, I know God's at the center of it, but what work can we do to make that happen? Because, you know, even if God in the end it wins, we still have to do the work, and dedicating our lives and our efforts to things pleasing to him is the only way I know how to live.
That's a beautiful wrap up, Tom. You know, the last question I was going to ask is what you could suggest to the viewers, you know, anybody who's listened all the way to the end of this, like actionable ways to just focus on making their lives better, getting through this. You know, I read a statistic this morning about how the insurance companies are expecting an even higher death rate in 2022 of all cause mortality, which we all know what that means, and especially as things are getting obviously more tense with overuse of powers up in our neighbor to the north, and then all of the issues that are going on across the world in Ukraine. You know, what can the average listener, besides making time to pray and read their Bible and get right with God, what could we do?
So I'll try to give you a 3-minute summary of what I think is coming down the line in the next 2 to 3 months, because time is short. What happened in Canada is coming here. The trucker convoys have already started to form. They've pre-branded them as terrorism. And what we have seen is the imposition of the social credit score through the seizure of bank accounts like we see in Canada. It's coming to the United States as part of the larger World Economic Forum plan. We see that being scripted very heavily. And we see that the dependency that they're going to want to create is going to depend on a system crash, which will probably be blamed on Russia, which they may or may not commit. Our deep state may or may not commit it. But what happens during wartime is that governments use that as a means to consolidate power against the people. And here in the West, and in America specifically, where people are armed to the teeth and mad as hell, they will use that as an excuse to try to take greater power. I am predicting, and I've said it quite publicly, that I think we will eventually have a Boston Massacre type event that will lead us into a full-on civil war. So when that happens, you have to remember that the key thing that defines us right now and how we live day to day is usually something called just-in-time logistics. And it basically means that there's about 72 hours of supply in any given place. Think of when the toilet paper wasn't there, if you don't remember how that was. We have used our background and our supplies. We also have a situation where 95% of the food in America comes from most places from more than 150 miles away. So what happens when the trucks aren't moving, either because the truckers don't want to go, or the police are there, or people are pissed off, and there isn't food in supermarkets? People who spent their whole life specializing in something, thinking they're experts, who don't know how to survive if their life depends upon it, unless they can go ahead and spend those little green bills, which, by the way, aren't buying anything these days. That's the world you're walking into. Now, you need to scope out the human geography where you live. Think, if you don't think you can be safe there, move while you still can. Otherwise, you're going to be kicking yourself later. Get yourself to have such supplies as you can, food, if that means going back in with family, if that means going home, or, you know, if you decide you're just going to be in an area, accept and understand these risks coming into it. Once you have those things aware and in your mind, fix yourself to do the best you can in the position you are. Get yourself to a place where your life makes sense, like we talked about, and understand that this system, specifically because of the fact that all of us are so invested in ourselves, will tear itself apart faster than any civilization we've seen in human history. And when it does, it will be violent and it will be ugly, because people will be scared and they don't know what to do. If you are someone who has a community built together, where you can anticipate these people, you can help the ones you can help, control the ones you can't, and ideally we want to help everyone. That's what we're told to do and instructed in the Bible. Then, you know, we try to prepare for that. I keep extra bags of rice around for just that reason. But of course, I live a million miles from anywhere and no one's going to get near me unless they were already coming. And that sort of preparedness is what I think you have to do, that you have to begin divesting yourself from a system that's doomed to fail. And you can try to stay until the last minute. You can try to get your last Bitcoin. You can try to make your last paycheck. But the thing is, understand you're playing Russian roulette and we've already shot off 5 empty rounds. Your choice. Well
said, Tom. Well, I wanted to, I do want to end thanking you, sir. You know, this has been an excellent conversation. I've been really looking forward to speaking with you. I very much enjoy your work, your books, and the content you bring out basically on a daily basis. So, you know, thank you again for taking the time. And I always like to thank God at the end of every one of my broadcasts Glory to God for all things. And God bless you, Tom.
God bless you. God bless the audience. And just hope that all of you will be safe. Pray the Lamb's blood over you all. God bless.